Hey, what's up guys, Ruff here. So today we're going to be going over some updates regarding the Trash Taste podcast fiasco. So in case you don't know, Trash Taste is a podcast run by the Anime Man, CDawgVA, and Giguk. They talk about anime and Japanese culture and things like that. And recently they had an episode get a lot of backlash thanks to their special guest, Hasan Piker. You can see the like-dislike ratio is just over a 24% like ratio on this video. Tens of thousands of comments. All of them pretty mad about the choice of guest, Hasan Piker, based on the many controversial things he has said over the past couple of years. And today we're going to be looking at the first response from anyone at Trash Taste regarding this situation. I think the things that are said by CDawgVA in this case are actually pretty interesting and probably answer most of the questions people have. Now, the first update to give you guys before we get into the new stuff, Hasan has been banned on Twitch. Hell hath frozen over. He's actually been banned for once, and that stems from his recent comments where he advocated for violence against a sitting US official. I guess that's what it takes to actually get punished if you're Hasan Piker on Twitch. But he has been banned. How long that lasts, who knows? Probably not very long. But here is the response we're looking at today. I was uploaded on Connor's clip channel here. You can see the reception of this is, still somewhat controversial. It's obviously a lot better than the podcast episode. I think some people are still angry about it, but it's titled How Trash Taste Tried to Deal with the Hasan Controversy. Now, it's a 17-minute video. We're just going to kind of hit the key parts for brevity's sake here, but let's start off right here.
The way that we handle it, and the way that you should handle a lot of these things when they happen, like drama, is that sometimes it's just better to just not address anything and just let it just fade.
Unironically, that's probably the best answer for most controversy, especially if you're someone who makes a lot of content, especially if you're like a daily uploading channel or streamer or something. Just like keep moving, unless it's really bad. In this case, it's pretty bad, right? A lot of people are upset, but I think the issue here is that they made that pinned comment about deleting comments, and it's like they started some sort of a response, which makes people expect a full response. If they're going to touch one subject, eventually you would expect they're going to touch all the subjects, and that's kind of what they're doing here, as it would play out.
Mainly because when things get too heated, almost, no matter what you would say in that moment, people are still going to be going to be unhappy, or at least, the group of people that want an apology or whatever, anything like that. If you say anything, they're just going to be more unhappy, and it just adds more fire to the flame. So that's why generally we're just kind of like, all right, we'll just let it, let it die down, let it move on, let them get over it, and have their fun for the week. Most of them are brigaders. Well, okay, look, here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. So this is gonna get clipped as well. I know this now. So I want to be very mindful about how I approach this. If I'm gonna mention anything here, is that I think there are a couple of important things to mention. So I think, first of all, I think from our podcast perspective and from our perspective, if it is fair to say that if we don't engage in politics publicly, because it's just a mess. None of us live in the US. None of us are in any of these kind of intense political situations. Whatsoever. I think it is also fair to say that, why would we bring someone political on? Which I think is very fair. And
that's a very fair point. The fact he was there just in general wasn't very good, but it really wasn't just because he's a political streamer. I think they could have brought a lot of political streamers onto the podcast and wouldn't have had anywhere near the backlash. The reason people were so mad at this particular episode is clearly because of Hasan. And it's not just because he talks about politics, it's because people don't like the unhinged stuff he has said time and time again.
Extremely, very fair criticism of us to do, which I agree with. And then I think the most annoying thing from my perspective and this whole thing is that there were legitimately fans of Trash Taste who were unhappy. And it's frustrating because you can't see or actually hear from people who watch Trash Taste or who aren't happy, because it just turned into a political dick swinging contest.
Okay, I think there's some bit of fairness there. It's hard to get a perspective on what the actual Trash Taste podcast fans think when there's so much negativity coming from people who probably aren't subscribed and are just going to this video to basically jump in on what's going on. And as I said in my previous coverage of this whole thing, I don't think the backlash on the episode was necessarily a repudiation of Trash Taste. I think they grossly underestimated how much people don't like Hasan outside his community. And I think this was more of a repudiation of Hasan himself. People saw the podcast episode as like a lightning rod for their dislike of that man. And unfortunately for them, it's their podcast. So they're the ones kind of seeing the public reflection of that with the like-dislike ratio and all of the comments. But the anger was mostly towards Hasan. They didn't like the fact that they were on the podcast, but they're much more angry and seeing it as an opportunity to talk about him and show that they don't like him and to repudiate him publicly. And just happened, the vehicle for this was their podcast episode. And the interesting thing too, I think he talks about this later, but you can't really tell based on an outside perspective. I don't have their analytics, but looking at their Trash Taste YouTube channel, at most, they've lost 10,000 subs. Because that's the way the metric moves. It's every 10,000 subs once you get past 1 million. So from what I can see, they've lost no more than 10,000. That's at the very most they've lost. So they might have only lost a few thousand subs over this, despite having an absolute nightmare of a reaction to that episode.
About which side, which is bad on our part, because like we've never had any politics or any kind of talks like that in the comments, so I think it was kind of bad of us to kind of almost invite that. Second of all, the thing that was also very frustrating is that it, no matter what people were saying, there was a lot of brigading on a lot of sides, and I think that two things can be true at once. There were Trash Taste fans who were unhappy, and there also was brigading happening, which is also very frustrating to deal with, because then it's like, okay, now we can't actually listen to any criticism on the episode because both sides are jumping in, right?
Well, I think that is somewhat important. I mean, yeah, there were definitely people jumping in. Like I said, that podcast episode was like a lightning rod for people who don't like Hasan, and that's a way to show their disliking of him. But I think also, as he'll go on to say, is he wasn't aware of all these things involving politics and Hasan and some of his takes. And it's like, well, that's maybe an opportunity to read some of those and understand why people are so mad and why it was a bad idea to have him on the podcast. But I do generally get what he's trying to go after here.
And I even told Hasan, I was like, hey man, can you not? Like, it's bad enough that one side is doing this. Please don't bring up the fucking episode and be like, hey, send people. Just be above this. Don't.
I'm glad also you told him to knock that off, because that made things infinitely worse. Okay, there was already a lot of negativity heading towards the episode, but when he said the whole counter brigading comment and encouraged his audience to jump in there and try to change the narrative, that made people even more divisive, and that made people even more gung-ho about trying to send a message with this podcast and the choice of special guest.
Don't do this, because look, if people who have very extreme beliefs want to go crazy, I can't stop them. They can do whatever they want, but you hope that at least another side wouldn't do that as well. So I told him, I was like, hey, please don't do that.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, man, okay, my bad. But I think as well, I told Hasan as well, I was like, hey, look, the show is not political. We don't want to deal with politics. We're most likely not going to have you on again. No, and that's not like anything like, hey man,
Well, no, at this point, like, what else are you going to do? Like, you could, it could have been an unfair situation. Let's say instead of Hasan, it was someone else completely innocent, and for some reason people went absolutely apeshit and were angry about it. Like, yeah, maybe it's unfair in that situation, but you can't do it again because people would be even more angry. And with Hasan, yeah, he was on the podcast 2 years ago, and I believe the like-dislike ratio on that was like 90%. But a lot has changed over 2 years. I mean, he's made more unhinged takes, but most importantly, I think more people are aware of the things he has said, and that's why people were so ready to jump on that particular episode, the latest one he appeared on. And yeah, you can't bring him back now. Like, it would be even worse, honestly. Speaking as someone who is many moons ago, I made a video, I think it was a waifu tier list. People didn't really like some of my choices. So I doubled down the next day and said, aha, You're right. You guys were right. You thought I ranked these characters too low. You're right. I got to move them even lower. People didn't find that very funny. So I guess doubling down sometimes when people are mad like that doesn't really work out too well. And this is a no-brainer at this point. How could you possibly have him back on? But I believe it's right here. He actually mentions the specific number of subs they lost, and it's a pretty surprising number.
I can tell you exactly how many right now. Let me find out. We lost 4,000 subscribers, which is not a lot, but I also think it is disingenuous, and I think it's bad to pretend like, you know, that people aren't unhappy.
Well, I mean, first of all, 4,000 subs, losing 4,000 on a video like that with so much negative feedback is actually a very small number. I mean, 4,000 is nothing to like waft your hands at. Like, it's still a significant number, and it shows that people who were fans of the podcast and were subscribed were not happy. But it also shows that a lot of the people, like I said, the video is like a lightning rod for people who don't like Hasan, so they went over there to show their disliking of him, and that's reflected by the sub numbers there. And again, you know, with a channel, they have like 1.5 million subs, to lose 4,000 is like a pretty small number. It's not insignificant, but you would expect it to be a lot higher given what happened and how angry people were about the podcast itself. But let's skip ahead to the next section here.
Well, there was obviously a lot of bandwagoning on it because people were, you know, loving it, and people don't like Hasan, and so people were jumping on it and making videos about it. There was a lot of stuff that people said that was just flat out not true, and people were just making stuff up. Some people were saying like, oh, they didn't have this guest on. They said they were too controversial, but they had another guest on. That's never happened.
So the name I heard in that situation, I saw people saying that they wouldn't have Nux Taku on the podcast because he was too controversial. That was one of the names I heard people saying. I've never seen any proof of that, so I don't know. I feel like if they were willing to invite Hasan, I think they'd be willing to invite Nux if that's something that they wanted to do. But yeah, I think people were making that up. It's also like with the deletion of comments. I said that in my first reaction to this whole thing. I believe them when they said that they weren't deleting comments, because YouTube's comment section is really messed up, and it's not too surprising. But I think he's going to talk about that in a sec.
That's just a bunch of lies. So I don't know what that was about. There was also the only things that were disappointing from me, my perspective as well, that like really, I was like, man, what the fuck? Is that people would then make whole narratives based around, because we had X on, that we then couldn't criticize any other creator. We couldn't, you know, they were like, oh, you know, these people have changed, they're horrible, yada, yada, yada. And that was like, oh, okay, that sucks that people are just making assumptions, but not a big deal.
People would lie on the internet?
But yeah, no, I mean, look, the reason why we didn't address it right away, we wanted to wait, was because a lot of people were, you know, they were just demanding things. There were a lot of comments that were like, you need to delete this episode. Where I feel pretty confident in saying this, where if you ask Trash Taste viewers, do you want them to delete the episode? I think most viewers are sensible. They would say, hey, even if I don't agree with this episode, or I don't agree with this one, I wouldn't want you to delete an episode. Move, actually. You know, I think that's crazy. Now, also, I want to make it very clear as well, in case you're watching this on YouTube, that because this is no doubt going to be a clip, that I'm sure that there's a good chance the comments, you know, might get taken over depending on how big this clip is. Please think for yourself. It's
gotten a lot of attention so
Please
far.
Don't just read top comment and form your opinion based around that. Obviously, you're all adults. I trust you. And what I really appreciated is that a lot of Trash Taste fans did seem to be just tired of people picking a side and being emotionally charged about it, and we're kind of just like, hey, maybe it's not for me. All good.
Yeah,
next episode.
That's not the vibe that they do on their channel. I think that's pretty obvious. But let's skip to one more section, and then we're going to wrap this up.
But I think the underlying point is the same. Of like, look, to the Trash Taste fans that are disappointed, sorry, you know, it is unfortunate. Are we going to delete the episode? No. Did you unsubscribe? Okay, I apologize for that you felt the need to unsubscribe. But at the end of the day, you know, there was we did not estimate what would happen.
And that's pretty much exactly what I was saying. They just made a bad choice. It's pretty much all it is. Anyone who thinks there was some kind of malice in their choice of guest or they're adopting his political views or anything like that. I think that's going too far. I just think this was the results of not really reading the room, not understanding just how controversial Hasan is. They even, Connor at one point basically also said that he doesn't really keep up to date on these things. I mean, I think on the one hand, you have a bit of a responsibility to understand who you're inviting onto your podcast, but I also understand that, yeah, not everyone's up to date on all this stuff. So, it kind of depends on how you view that. But overall, like I said, bad choice. They didn't really see the big picture here and how much people disliked Hasan, and it was reflected in the like-dislike ratio. And I look at the latest episode. They uploaded another episode after the Hasan one, and that one has a somewhat abnormal amount of dislikes compared to their usual video. I think people are still mad about this, and they're still channeling their frustration through another lightning rod, which at this point is any episode uploaded, but obviously it's died down a lot. So I don't think that's going to continue for a bunch of episodes in the future. But for now, that's really what we got, okay? I think it's the main takeaways is that they acknowledge they underestimated the reaction the public would have to this. Hasan's not going to be on the podcast anymore, it sounds like. And pretty much there was a lot of people from outside the community or outside their subscription base that were coming in to jump in on the video. And yeah, that's pretty much everything we need to know here, and that's about it. So as always, feel free to share your thoughts about today's topics in the comment section down below. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.